2 weeks ago, I crashed on the road, broke my arm clean in half, and smashed the humerus head into bits, dislocated it for a day until a surgeon was able to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. In this video, I thought I would share with you some of the many crashes I've had over the years, stuff I've broken in terms of body parts, and stuff I've broken on bikes, and another category of stuff that broke on bikes that didn't lead to crashes, in the spirit of what can be learned from all this. Because one conclusion that many of us have when we hit the deck hard and it hurts is this is a dumb activity. What the heck are we doing? Especially as those of us getting up there in years, like, is this really a good activity? I ultimately conclude, yes, it is a very good activity, but one not without consequences. So I thought we could go through crashes, causes of crashes, and then fails as two different categories. Things I've broken on my body: arm, shoulder, scapula, hand, some vertebrae. Had a number of concussions, which I don't know if that counts as a breakage, break in your brain. Certainly not a pleasant thing. And then more road rash than I can count on my one kind of good hand now. In terms of bike parts, got my list here that I scratched out with my left hand. I'm not left-handed. Broken frames, fork, pedal, shifter, derailleur, brakes, rim, hub, chain, seat post. Never broken a stem, never broken a steer tube. Just like with the body, when there's multiple things and one of them breaks, that's okay, like a spoke, no problem. When there's a singular thing like a neck or a stem, that's a much bigger deal when one of those bad boys breaks. So steerer and stem are things I have never broken. Here are some of my greatest hits. I have to go back to the good old collegiate racing days. Valley of the Sun, circa, 1842, something like this. I had indication that not everything was well with my bike, but went ahead and started a sprint very close to the front of a field sprint and put myself down on the floor along with dozens of others. Woke up after being knocked out cold and saw what looked like a Civil War reenactment battlefield of just bodies scattered all over the place. That was due to my inattentiveness. The drive side chainstay on the inside was cracked, and when I'd put hard pressure into the pedals, the right, the bike would in the rear would pull right, causing the chain to hit the front derailleur. And when it was in the big ring, it would, at the minimum, rub, but sometimes it would knock it down into the small ring or just knock it clear off. I discovered this on the first day of Valley Sun on the time trial, leaving the time trial ramp, 3, 2, 1, stomped on it, boop, popped the chain off and nose wheelie down the ramp. And then in the road race, which is, basically a big loop, there's not many hard accelerations in that, but there's a 90-degree turn at the bottom of the first hill, and every lap sprinting out of there, it would, the chain would drop down, and I was fiddling with the barrel adjuster on that shifter, trying to move the derailleur. Again, had noticed my bike was telling me things were amiss, but I did not pay attention to it. So inattentiveness, I think, is one leading cause of crashes. Lots of crashes are just dumb luck, right? Like the proverbial poop does happens. But when I think back of things that I could have prevented, is listening, paying attention to the bike. Sometimes that's, cleaning the bike is a good way to find, cracks or things that are broken or about to break. That's a tactic I certainly endorse now, is, regularly checking in with your bike. If you're not super comfortable doing that, not the cleaning part, but just checking in to see what's working, have a mechanic do that on a regular basis if and when you hear something out of the ordinary or feel something out of the ordinary. That Valley of the Sun crash resulted in a lot of skin loss and a concussion. On a much more garden variety of inattentiveness leading to a crash, making a left-hand turn just here in my neighborhood, and washing out the front wheel, ended up on the floor, was not injured at all. My pride was wounded. I was a little embarrassed to crash in front of people passing by. I had a front flat tire. I didn't realize that until I leaned the bike and it went over. So that's another in the category of inattentiveness to bikes that are not at full functioning capacity can cause a crash. One of my favorite crashes has to be running dead into a giant 8-foot day-glow construction sign in the middle of a wide open road. I was testing power meters. I had 4 of them on at a time, and one was not reading, and I was looking down while riding in the bike lane, trying to see if there was something on the magnet that was causing the cadence and therefore the power not to be picked up. And out of the top of my vision, there was a flash of orange right before blammo! I just went straight into said 8-foot construction sign. Luckily, it was one of these that had the big steel coil base, so there's a bunch of give to it. So should you drive your car or face directly into the sign, there's some give. So I hit the thing, flipped over, flung the bike, landed on the ground, was completely fine, unscathed. And I immediately had 2 conflicting thoughts. One, I hope nobody saw it. And 2, I kind of wish somebody just saw that, because that was ridiculous. I just rode straight into a giant sign. So no harm, no foul, but definitely another check in the box of inattentiveness can lead to crashes. Another thing in the large, full, inattentive folder was doing a lunch group ride with some, at the time, colleagues, riding 2x2 out of town. I got knocked out cold. I don't remember exactly what happened, but this is what I surmised going backwards. My foot was not clipped in all the way. I'm constantly, as you guys know, changing bikes and pedals and gears and stuff, was on some speed play pedals, and I don't think my right cleat was engaged all the way, because when I stood up a little bit later down the road, I slipped out of that, and my foot, I believe, ended up in the wheel and then hitting the fork. What the aftermath was a knocked out dude and a broken fork. My friends at the time were like, "Oh, dude, the fork failed, and that's got to be a recall." I'm like, "No, forks don't just snap in half for no good reason." And I feel like it was my foot for a couple reasons. One, because my foot hurt like mad for days later. I sent the bike. It was a Specialized Athos. Sent it back to Specialized. Engineers took a look at it, and they're like, "Yeah, something got in the wheel and hit the back of the fork. A very strong fixed object. Not necessarily that my foot was the strong object, but a carbon-soled shoe. And also there's just like weird scuffs on the shoe that made no sense." So, that was a weird one, and again, attribute that to not being clipped in all the way when I thought I was. So just paying attention to your gear and making sure it's working as it should be. Again, hindsight's 20/20, right? But that was one of those mini forehead slappers of like, if I had made sure I was snapped into the cleat, or snapped the cleat into the pedal, I should say, that could have been prevented. It made me also rethink another famous Delaney crash, the Mavic Arsis incident of, I don't recall the year. I'll try to dig that up, maybe put a link in the description below. I was working at Velo News at the time, and a friend who worked at Specialized dropped off, I believe it was like the SL2 tarmac, something like this, that had Arsis wheels on there. And I was joking with him, "Hey man, did you bring a mouth guard for me to ride these wheels?" Because at the time, the Arsis wheels had been recalled. This is the 2nd generation Arsis wheel. I think I've got this spoke in here somewhere. Yes, here we have the spoke. And he's like, no, these spokes are good. They're fine. You can tell by there's 2 little stripes on here. These are the new and improved spokes. I was doing a Cat 2 race, I want to say, with a certain Cayley frets up in that bunch, and with a couple corners to go, the front felt funny, and I remember unclipping one foot trying to stabilize, and then the next thing I knew, the wheel gave up the ghost, and I went over the handlebars and broke my scapula, and every single spoke had broken. And that was a mystery to me, and even to the people who were there with me, like, that was a weird thing. You were fine, and then all of a sudden, the wheel was no longer a wheel. It was just a hub and a rim, and you went over the bars and put your face on the floor. A few folks from Mavic came out to investigate because they were stumped on it. The way these work was in compaction, not traction, so it was a slightly different style of wheel. But my contention at the time, and still is, things break, right? Especially in crashes, that happens. But with a metal or even a normal carbon spoked wheel, even if something gets in the spokes, I've never seen another wheel where every single spoke gets blown out. So that was that was a doozy. But I think, again, going back to this, what happened with the ASOS of me sticking my foot in it, quite literally, is that I think there's a chance that when I had my foot out trying to stabilize the front end slipping around, my foot may have hit a spoke or all the spokes, and that could have been a cause. So remains a mystery, but that's another one more chapter in the big thick book of Delaney hitting the floor spectacularly. Some more pedestrian crashes that have led to stuff breaking. In Gallup, New Mexico, back in the day, we were doing a criterium out there, and it was one of these, set on a bit of a slope where there's a screaming downhill into the start finish, and then a uphill corner after there. As there often is in criteriums, some boys hit the floor. I tried to dodge them, and mostly did, and made it over into the hay, into the hay bales. So, crashed into that, jumped up, grabbed my bike, got back on it, and started riding up the hill. Out of the saddle was fine, and sat back down on the saddle at the top of the hill. And then I had a lot of flex in the post, and looked down, and it was a Zertz post. If y'all remember, Specialized for a few years, had like the gummy breast insert like material that was often put in the fork of the Roubaix bike, and in other places like the seat post as a vibration damper, allegedly. What it also was a point of weakness for the seat post. So that was a wah thing of like we'd driven a few hours out to do the race, and I was fine. The bike was done. Similarly, warming up for a cyclocross race here in Colorado, was riding over a log, a very innocuous little thing, but managed to just get it completely wrong. Went over front ways, buried the shifters and probably my face and hands in the sand, and got up and the shifters busted. And that was, 10 minutes before the race starts, and managed to do that race, not with 2 shifters, but with a shifter. These are all fairly straightforward crashes, right? 2 other pretty spectacular crashes, ending in the hospital. Broke my pelvis in the Dolomites, broke my back at the world's tiniest indoor velodrome here in Boulder. Dolomites was a case of me being a dum-dum, trying to film, or I was filming, in hand with GoPro, came around a corner, went to grab both brakes, leading into a sharp switchback, and the GoPro got jammed behind the front brake lever, so while I felt like I was grabbing both brakes hard equally, I only grabbed the rear, locked up, washed out, slid across the road, hit my pelvis on a concrete guardrail, and I went to the hospital there. Wah, wah.
You.
Yeah, turn it sideways. I've been doing this one sideways. There you go.
And what's left of your chamois and all your skin gone. But he's alive and well. Thank you, baby Jesus.
Don't record on descents, kids, or this will happen to you. And the Boulder Velodrome was doing just a fun workout with a mixed group of folks. And it was this tiny little track, like 125 meters or something like that. Just itty bitty. It was more like a circle than instead of 4 left-hand turns. And then in the infield, there was a mountain bike skills track built up, a place my son liked to ride. But the end result was there was like a 4-foot plywood wall that when you were down in the lane would block your view. So I came around hot, and there was a rider who had been riding up high, thought we were all done, and he had come down and was right in front of me going a very different speed. So I dodged underneath onto the apron just as I got back up into turn 3, and bike and body were unable to make that quick transition back up onto the track and into the turn. Bike buckled, and I shot up over the top of the railing, and there was netting all around the track except for this one little spot, and I managed to shoot the gap, went over the top. I don't know, it was like 20, 25 feet or so, dropped down, feet went out from under me, and I hit my delicate little tuchus on the concrete and broke compression fractures on the back. Yeah, that was a good one. That was a good one. Now the next section, gear fails, gear breaking, giving up the ghost prematurely in its life or otherwise. Had a Bontrager hub crack when the wheel was just hanging on the wall. I had a set of power tap wheels. If you remember, back in the day, the power tap was the one power meter option for those of us who couldn't afford an SRM, which was most of us. And I was very pleased to have a matching set of Bontrager rims, and the hub just cracked while sitting on a hook on the wall. That was an odd one. Broken rims, hitting potholes. Like I remember riding a deep Mavic rim, smashed it through a pothole and it cracked. Didn't take me down, didn't take anyone else down, but those are kind of like run-of-the-mill breakages. Along the same lines, this had a little rubber insert to smooth the air transition between the tire and the rim. That thing came out on me before the rim was cracked, coming downhill, just doing hard turns. The thing popped out and was like flapping around like a little bracelet. So that was another suspect thing. Thankfully did not lead to a crash. A rim failure that could have led to a crash, but did not. My very first time riding carbon clinchers was at a Specialized launch in Spain. This was Specialized's first take on the carbon clincher. You guys remember the bad old days of carbon clinchers? It's, carbon rims with the dual task of holding a tire in and being a brake surface. And brake surfaces generate a lot of heat because of the friction, and heat and carbon fiber are not necessarily good buddies if you want to keep the structure the same. So what happens is coming down a steep hill where I was braking hard, the thing just kind of flopped open like a soft taco. The tire did not blow off, as can happen with those, but that happened first with the front wheel and then later with the rear wheel. And that is a category of products I am glad is no longer with us. It seems like if we, the bike industry, had disc brakes come out before carbon clinchers, the carbon clinchers still might be a thing, but having a carbon clincher rim surface as also the brake surface was no bueno. So that's one I'm glad is in our rear view mirror. And then, like many of you, I've had a lot of garden variety breakages of things just giving up the ghost, like Crank Brothers egg beater pedals. I thought those were sweet for cyclocross because of how minimal the design was and is, and very easy for shedding mud, but the thing would occasionally break, and that was irritating. Never led to a crash, but would lead to some frustrations. Had a chain break, shoot, must have been 20 years ago or so, probably due to lack of proper maintenance on my part. Had a brake piston fail once, coming down Rocky Mountain, coming out of Rocky Mountain National Park here way up in the mountains. A brake started just making a disc brake, mind you, started making all kinds of noise and squealing, and then it was just gone, and the piston itself had cracked and brake fluid leaked through there. That was not a good one, but luckily brakes come in pairs, right? Shifter cables have died, brake cables have frayed, just kind of run-of-the-mill metal failure. Had a Shimano cassette start squeaking on me. But all in all, I've ridden hundreds of thousands of miles and hundreds of bikes, and I don't know how many different configurations of gear. And yes, stuff breaks, particularly when you crash it. But in the rear of your mirror, looking back over all this stuff, I cannot think of very many instances where I could point to a product and be like, this is a dangerous product, don't use it. Almost always what's dangerous is the operator or the operators, right? Like particularly in races or in group rides, things happen and one person's poor judgment or bad luck can have a domino effect on others. But the carbon clincher, like I mentioned, that was a stinker for sure. Not that it was dangerous all the time, but that was something that could fail, and I'm glad to see that that's gone the way of the dodo bird. As far as how I crashed this time, the short answer is I'm not sure. I had just done a 20-minute effort up a big hill here, Linden, for those of you who live in the Boulder area, and was coming around Wild Horse Circle, did left-hand turn, right-hand turn, and remember coming in pretty hot, and then my vision was like barrel rolling and went down, presumably like hit this first, smashed this up, flipped over, hit my hand. Amazingly, the bike, with the exception of a scuff on the back of the saddle, the bike literally did not have a scratch on it. The left shifter was bent all the way in, but since my hand took the blow, lever was not scratched at all. The right lever was not scratched. The derailleur was not scratched. That's a new one for me. As someone who has crashed often and in a variety of inventive ways, I've never done a crash that hard with the bike, with the exception of the saddle, being unscathed. So wonders never cease. So what is the takeaway from all this rambling, crashing nonsense? Well, a few things. One, be mindful of your gear. Check your gear. Washing your bike regularly is a great way to see if there are any cracks or tires that need to be replaced. When you hear strange sounds, that's also a good indication that you should pay attention to your bike or take it to a mechanic who can take care of your bike. Be present. When my kids were smaller, I used to tell them, pay attention to the world around you, and that's something that they love spitting back at me. And in many of my crashes, not paying attention to the world around me and or not being respectful of the physics involved has led to some pileups. One last crash story. I hit a deer, or I contend the deer hit me. I was coming down Flagstaff with my buddy Dave. This was back in the early days of Strava. I saw another friend, Matt Basoko, was like 4th on the leaderboard for the downhill segment. I was like, Matt's always going to beat me uphill, but I can take him downhill. So I was racing downhill, came around the corner. There was a truck parked in the lane. I went wide of it instead of slowing down like a sensible person. The truck was parked because there was a bunch of deer in front of it going off the road. So I'm watching the deer to make sure I don't hit them. I'm coming around the truck, and just as I'm passing the truck, I see the last lone deer over here in the ditch who's waiting for me. And as I'm about to pull even with the truck, he or she bounds in front of me, and I just plant my face right in the side of this thing. I remember like the gamey, like scratchy feel. Hit the thing, catapulted, flung the bike. Got away with just a little broken metatarsal in the hand, and then the frame was cracked up a bit and broke some prototype wheels. Sorry about that, Specialized. So that was one more example of not being fully present and respecting what was going on around me. One last piece I'd recommend, and you probably already do this, is just having some sort of means of communication with your loved ones, whether that's letting them know where you're riding or just having your phone on you so you can call, or so if somebody finds you all tangled up in a tree, they can identify you and call for help. A few different computers like Garmin Edge computers have a crash notification built in. I've gotten a number of false positives with that. My daughter has received many of these alerts while she's sitting there in high school class and has gotten out of class. Dad, you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm under biking on a gravel bike, and it's been rattling the computer around. On our phones, we've got something called Life 360, which my wife, daughter, and I use to keep track of whereabouts of who's where. And that, I learned with this latest crash, also notifies your emergency contacts when you take a hard spill. That, in some ways, might be a little bit better than the handlebar-mounted unit detecting hard bumps, because if your phone's in your jersey pocket, there's a bit more vibration absorption under normal circumstances, and if and when you go flying off the bicycle and fall on the floor and it comes to an abrupt stop, then that can detect a potential crash and notify folks. So in that instance, my daughter called me, hey, Dad, you okay? I'm like, no, I'm not okay. So that's a different kind of video for this channel, eh? Well, let me know what questions you have. Let me know what crashes you have had and how you have dealt with them. Going forward, I'm certainly going to be doing more videos. That's my game plan here. This channel is how I make a living. I would get back to some greatest hits, not of this type, but of the more pleasant type. My favorite gravel bikes of the year, because probably not going to be riding any more gravel bikes this year. Do the same thing for gravel tires, and then do some reviews on some bikes I have had some time on. So, as always, appreciate you guys watching, guys and gals watching. Appreciate you subscribing. Let me know what questions you have. And by all means, keep getting out there. Be safe and enjoy the ride.